Thank you so much, Lana, and Anne, for the invitation and generous introduction. And it's such a pleasure and honor for me to share my work with folks here at the UVA. And I'm very grateful to East Asia Center for hosting this event, and also colleagues at Media Studies for the invitation and also interest in my work. So in the following 15 minutes or so, I'll first give a very brief overview of my book. And then, as Lana said, I'll delve into the story of rural e-commerce, which is one of the 3 stories I told in the book, I think would be of interest to folks here. So let me start from the very beginning of my journey of writing this book. The inspiration actually came to me in 2011, which is the summer before I moved to the US to start my PhD at Edinburgh, on a bus trip actually to visit my uncle's family in rural China. So that fateful summer, riding through the countryside on the intercity bus, I saw something unexpected at that time. Now it's kind of commonplace already in China, but it was really rare when I first encountered it. It was multiple advertisement for the e-commerce platform Taobao, all targeting peasants. And 2 of the ads actually stood out to me in particular. One said, tired of life as a migrant worker, why not come home to work on Taobao? So for those of you who don't know, Taobao is an e-commerce platform affiliated to the Chinese e-commerce company Alibaba, kind of well known in the West now. And the second one said, a cup of coffee and internet cable, stay at home, become an e-commerce entrepreneur, and your millionaire dream will come true. So when I saw this, I was thinking to myself, so who didn't want a job like that, right? And my cousin, a former migrant factory worker at that time in his early 30s, had apparently reached the same conclusion. So not long after my arriving, I learned that he had recently reinvented himself as an e-commerce entrepreneur. Over dinner, he explained that he had decided not to return to the old factory after that year's Spring Festival holiday. After more than a decade spent floating in the city, actually in South China, where he worked at a toy factory there for many years. The birth of his second daughter the previous year had finally convinced him that it was time to start anew, and this time closer to home. At a middle school reunion party, he had learned from a former classmate about a new business opportunity selling small hand-braided furniture items and home decorations online. So I'll give you some examples of the kind of things they design and also produce and sell there in the village. So after making the trip to W Village, the same village featured in the Taobao ads, the second ads that I passed on the bus, some online research and a long conversation with his family, he actually tapped into their savings to set up a Taobao store. So my cousin's experience as an entrepreneur, however, suggested that billboards' promises, if not false, were at least greatly exaggerated. Though his life was more comfortable than it had been on the factory line, he was far from becoming a millionaire, as you can imagine. It took him actually 4 months to just recover his startup cost. And 6 months into his entrepreneurial adventure, his monthly revenues were actually barely topping his wages as a factory worker. And especially nowadays, a lot of factories pay very well because of the labor shortage in China and young people generally not wanting to go to do factory work. And it turns out a successful e-commerce venture requires more than just a cup of coffee and internet cable. He had to learn how to set up, design, and brand his online shop, not to mention the more complicated tasks like product sourcing, storaging, packaging, mailing, and dealing with local home-based weavers. And you will be meeting some of them in the presentation later as well. So during my stay, I found that his time was actually packed with chores like taking product pictures, talking to buyers on the internet over the phone, and analyzing his sales statistics. And his workday actually well stretched into the evening as he watched online tutorials taught by e-commerce gurus, and also take classes to hone his design skills, right? So he has to pick up all these skills all by himself to kind of transform himself into some kind of different type of worker and entrepreneur as well. And nor was this a simple one-man operation. His home had been transformed into an e-commerce workshop with a bedroom doubling as a makeshift photo studio and the living room cluttered with handicrafts. The whole extended family was involved. My cousin's wife helped with customer service while taking care of their 2 small kids. My uncle also chipped in by packaging and shipping products. And my aunt had taken charge of, cooking and other household chores, and talking about reproductive labor there. And this was all done on top of tending to the family's small wheat plot. So they still, attend to farming on the side. Over the ensuing decade, my cousin's life would actually take numerous twists and turns. His family e-commerce business boomed actually between 2011 and 13, a time that was generally recognized by my informants in the W Village as the golden age of rural e-commerce in China. And starting in early 2014, however, his revenue began to drop as a wave of rural entrepreneurs answered to the central government's call for so-called mass entrepreneurship and innovation. Because a lot of people flow in, like oversaturated the market. When I last visited the family in the summer of 2019, fierce competition had so eaten into their profits that my cousin-in-law had actually to, take a part-time job as a waitress in a nearby town just to make ends meet. So my cousin was not alone in his desire to kind of reinvent himself to fit into the new global economy. And since the 1990s, cultivating entrepreneurship has been hailed as a kind of universal path to empowerment, a kind of a silver bullet for a whole host of individual and collective ills. The resulting worldwide cult of entrepreneurialism is kind of pushing individuals and nations alike to become more enterprising by reinventing themselves in profitable new ways. But as his story suggests, the firmer underlying the kind of code of entrepreneurialism and its attendant imperatives to the kind of personal and collective reinvention are also concealing the kind of actual existing experiences of life beneath ideological euphoria. So the years following the 2008 global financial crisis, I think, represent a kind of a paradoxical moment in the history of global neoliberal order. Despite the kind of unprecedented proliferation of IT entrepreneurialism around the world, there is also a growing awareness of the limits of entrepreneurialism, along with kind of mounting popular demands demanding for stronger social programs and structural changes to the economy. So this book, as you're looking at it now, examines the everyday labor of entrepreneurial reinvention, focusing on China's economic and social restructuring following the 2008 global economic crisis. Afterwards, the country actually heavily promoted mass entrepreneurship and innovation, especially in technology. And from the 2000s to late 2010s, I traveled back and forth between the US and China, explore the kind of transnational linkages in entrepreneurship, which was mostly covered in the latter part of the book and also the first 2 chapters, and also journeys extensively throughout China's growing urban centers, especially in Beijing's Zhongguancun area, and also the countryside, which is the side I'm gonna focus on today. So in the book, I focus on 3 groups of entrepreneurs, intersectionally positioned with respect to class, gender, locale, and age. And this wide-angle approach, I hope, permits a kind of better view of China's surging entrepreneurialism at the state, the market, and individuals search for kind of alternatives to the previously unsustainable developmental model against the backdrop of global financial crisis, the US-China trade war that came in later, and also more recently, the COVID-19 pandemic when I was finishing up writing the book. So instead of a radical break with the past, I found that the kind of labor of entrepreneurial reinvention in China involves rearticulating global technological and economic shifts with existing regime of production and system of meaning. It actually blends elements of global trend towards labor individualization with the kind of culturally specific practices of self-making and nation building, which I argue has definitely opened up new opportunities for innovation, but also giving rise to new precarities, contradictions, and inequalities. So the goal of this book, as you can tell, is to kind of demystify entrepreneurialism by locating the source of capital's increased profits in the new regime of labor and changing production relations. And this actually puts me in conversation with more than 2 decades of scholarship about flexible, digital, and cultural labor. I think probably you are very familiar with that under neoliberalism since the 1970s. And despite enormous contribution, the scholarship focused mostly until very recently, I would say, on white middle-class workers in Western metropolitan centers like Silicon Alley and Silicon Valley. And more recently, the rise of transnational digital platforms has kind of fueled new studies of platform-based gig workers as network and sometimes quote-unquote placeless individuals, kind of disembedded from the larger socioeconomic context in which they're situated. So to complicate the existing literature on digital and cultural labor, I try to theorize the global entrepreneurialization of labor as a kind of dynamic process of quote-unquote reinvention. And this actually underlines the heterogeneous configurations, continuities, and ruptures from earlier regimes of work, its local embeddedness, and its also contingent and contradictory nature. And in doing so, I actually try to draw on extensively from abundant scholarship produced on China and other emerging and non-Western economies. So instead of treating, for example, socialist China as a negative case compared to the capitalist free market ideal, or attributing post-Mao China's so-called economic success solely to its adoption of market mechanism, I have expanded on the work of scholars who actually recognize a kind of past dependency of China's traditional socialist and post-Mao developmental models, and their institutional legacies and also constraints, I would say, have produced a kind of contested and fragmented polity in a state of constant evolution. So China's economic success until very recently, over the past 3 decades, has kind of led some scholars to search for a China model, particularly during the years following the 2008 global crisis. I will hear more conversations about that. So I definitely share their concerns about cultural specificities and historical continuities, and agree that China's experience kind of offer interesting lessons about how capitalism, or for that sake, socialism, has been organized both historically and at the current conjuncture. But I also reject the notion of Chinese institutionalism and exceptionalism, and instead try to explore the kind of syncretism, intersectionality, and inequalities, contradictions involved in the process of labor reinvention. As this book neared completion, we all know that the US-China bilateral relationship kind of went into a free fall. China's emerging technological strengths became a kind of target of American sanctions and containment amid still unfolding technological and trade war. This is also a topic that I examine in these pages, especially in the first 2 chapters. And by that time, enthusiasm about the China model kind of subsided, and the conversation turned to concerns over the China threat. So the idealized version of the China model perhaps once helped observers imagine a kind of alternatives to the current unipolar world order. Now, reductionist framing of China's threat may well contribute, at least in the short term, to the unification of a kind of otherwise divided American society against a foreign enemy. Either way, I believe it is actually more productive to overcome this kind of categorical formalism of either the China model versus the China threat, and instead to speak of a China paradigm, which is a term that I borrowed from the late historian Arif Derlich. So under this frame, the China experience is not a finished project to be emulated universally, but rather a work in progress, an ongoing experiment in how global principles articulate to historical circumstances and also local reality in the process of nation building and also in the process of self-making. And this means focusing not only on the success and potentialities, but also on the limitations and mistakes, not only on who have benefited from the change, but also who have lost out. It is to, I hope to depict and see China for what it is in all its complexity and contradictions. So now that I've mapped out my general approach to understanding, real labor in China, let's zoom in on one of the major field sites in the book, the e-commerce village W in Shandong province, which is located in the north and east of China, to tell a concrete story of how this kind of tech innovation and entrepreneurship-centered reinvention has happened on the ground in rural China, and also the lived experience of variously positioned entrepreneurial workers years. And for that purpose, I actually will weave together 2 chapters from this book and also a few of my recent published works and also ongoing works to tell the story there. So a little bit of history about this village here. So the village of W is located in northeast China's Yellow River Delta region. Due to its geographical location, handicrafts production in the W village actually dates back to 7th century BC. And after the People's Republic of China was founded in 1949, handicraft making became an industry under local government supervision, mainly to learn foreign currency to support urban industrialization. So even during socialist China, the industry didn't really, stall. It was just, transformed under state supervision in a way. And since the reform and opening up in the 80s, handicraft export has expanded rapidly, as you can imagine, feeding the demands for low price handmade products from more than 20 countries around the world. And definitely, like, they've been producing for Walmart and IKEA, so a lot of the products that we use on the daily basis. And as this export-oriented industrial chain matured, P Street weaving work was outsourced to women weavers in riverbank villages like W. So when I'm talking about W, I'm actually referring to 30 to 40 smaller villages along the bank of the river, with W as the sort of the village that's closer to the county seat. And so men in W were giving up farming and migrating to cities to work in factories or on construction sites. And most women actually stayed at home to work as weavers for private handicraft export firms, in addition to farming and domestic responsibilities. And the global economic crisis of 2008 somehow disrupted this order. Handicraft export contracted as overseas demand weakened because of economic downturn. Export-driven private business were also less profitable, but the substantial loss of urban jobs actually drove many migrant workers back home. Some who had learned to use computers and internet found alternative opportunities in selling village-made handicrafts online. And since 2008, the virtual economy of handicraft e-commerce targeting urban China's growing middle class actually gradually marginalized offline export-oriented firms in W. So the export firms still exist, but they are kind of, less competitive in a way in the market. Back in 2008, the e-commerce hype in the area actually took off with the return of a few young entrepreneurial urban migrants who had kind of seen the world. These migrant returnees had either worked or gone to college in the city and were not only more technically and commercially savvy, but also better attuned to urban consumer taste. As you can see later on, that turns out to be very important for them. And rural e-commerce provided alternative self-employment opportunities in the comfort of home for those who had grown increasingly dissatisfied with life in the floating population of the cities, like my cousin. And the majority of e-commerce business run by migrant returnees or locals in W Village were family-owned. The distinction between work and life there remains really fuzzy, as the logic of family-based small peasant economy met e-commerce, flexible regime of accumulation, and was actually revitalized by that kind of new regime of production. So Wei and his wife Yun were early on the scene. The couple was born in a small hamlet near W Village, and before moving to W to become full-time e-commerce entrepreneurs in 2007, they had run a small motorbike repair shop in B County. B County is the county seat of W Village. At that time, they were also selling village-made handicrafts on e-commerce platform Taobao as a side gig in the spare time. And Wei, one day, he joined a QQ chat group of small Taobao sellers and spent much of his time there talking to his fellows. So QQ, for those of you who don't know, it's an instant messenger app owned by Tencent, who also owns WeChat, the cell phone chat app. One day, he opened a link shared by a group of members to a motivational speech by Alibaba's now former CEO and very famous CEO, Jack Ma. So the speech was addressed to young people born in their 80s and 90s, we recalled. He told the audience that life is not fair and don't expect society to be equal. How could someone born in a Chinese peasant family compare himself to Bill Gates' son? He said, stop complaining and start your own e-commerce business. And e-commerce is the future of the world. Only you can change your fate. So that weekend, Jack Ma's words actually kept playing in Wei's head. After some deliberation, we made up his mind to become an e-commerce entrepreneur. And to save on shipping costs and time, he actually rented a home and workshop in W Village. So he relocated back to the village. And we compare to early days of e-commerce in W to a kind of gold rush. It was really easy back then to sell products on Taobao. You upload a picture and boom, orders started to come in. There were so few sellers compared to the rapidly growing number of buyers online. And the couple actually divided their labor between themselves, with Wei mainly responsible for product design, sourcing, photography, and e-commerce management, and Yun, the wife, doing customer service while taking care of their household chores and their son. And inspired by Wei's success, many young villagers in W followed example. So as I later on traveled around the country to see other villages, this actually happened to be a pattern of how people became entrepreneurs, e-commerce entrepreneurs. And the competitive advantage of rural e-commerce also attracted several young urbanites who felt marginalized in the city. The few urban to rural migrants I met in W were actually among the most successful entrepreneurs in the village. So Zhang here, he came from Jinan, which is a capital city of Shandong province. And his parents had been workers at state-owned companies. His father recently retired from the company, and his mother actually got laid off a decade ago. Having graduated from a local college with an associate degree in computer science, the then 30-year-old Zhang had dabbled in several small businesses before getting to know W's handicraft products from a college friends in 2007. A few months later, despite his parents' objections, Zhang actually relocated to the countryside and rented a space on W's Main Street. So I took a long quote from him because I felt like it's really kind of speak to the kind of experience of people like him. So he said, my parents were against the idea at the beginning. Born in the countryside, my dad worked so hard decades ago to get a job in a state-owned company in the city so that I could become an urbanite. So basically in China, you'll still have this kind of urban-rural divide based on the household registration system or hukou, right? So if you are born a urbanite and it's or rural residence, it's hard for you to really transform your identity. So John told me, I don't think I have a choice. I tried many different things in the city, only to realize the chance of improving my living standards limited without capital or personal connection. My parents are old retired workers who can't afford to buy me an apartment in G9, and without an apartment and a car, I'm worth little in the marriage market. I had to face reality and pursue a different trajectory if I want to change my fate. And going to the countryside was the right thing at the time. Like other migrants I met in W, rural e-commerce presented Zhang with an alternative path towards social mobility he couldn't find in the city. And once settled in W Village, Zhang's urban background, prior business experience, and broader social connections actually gave him an advantage over other most rural-born entrepreneurs. His Taobao shop quickly became one of the most profitable in the village. And as the scale of his business expanded, he also invited a close friend and the college dorm mate Jiang to be his business partner. The partners actually rented office or a living space attached to a large warehouse in W from the old couple they called godparents, or Gandie Gama in Chinese. The old man was a very powerful and well-respected person in W Village, who is actually a former village head. He used his power to rent several strategically located properties owned by village collective at a very low price. As you probably know, land in China is still owned by the state, and the village land are actually collected and owned. So that's why it's possible for him to do that using his power. And as the handicraft e-commerce industry boomed, the old couple reaped huge profits subleasing these properties. They also opened a handicraft wholesale business And to better integrate into the kind of lineage-based village society, and Zhang and Jiang, the two friends from the city, had to kind of cultivate a really cordial kind of quasi-familial relationship with the old couple, identifying them as godparents. They not only rented their property, but also sourced some of their products from the couple's wholesale business. And the old couple, in return, took the two urbanites under their wings and helping them navigate the kind of intricate relationship with villagers and also the local governments. So as you can see here, platformized family production was so prevalent that most of W's e-commerce business are family-owned or family-based. So a hybrid of e-commerce platforms and long traditions of family-based contracting system, platformization of familiar division of labor took advantage of the countryside reserve army of surplus labor, such as elderly, women with small children, teenagers, and also cheap office and warehouse rentals, usually the family house, to establish a competitive advantage for rural entrepreneurs. For village-born entrepreneurs, owning a micro family e-commerce business run from the comfort of home also offered a kind of more flexible and autonomous and profitable way to make a living, at least in the early days, right? So even urban reverse migrants like Zhang and Jiang had to adapt to this kind of labor regime to become, really successful, right? So to forming quasi-familiar relationships in that regard. So not only has e-commerce revitalized traditional family-based division of labor, it has also problematized kind of tensions between the individual and the collective. So people familiar with the history of Chinese socialism would understand the legacy of model and hero emulating campaigns captured by the Mao era slogan of learn from Dazhai in agriculture and learn from Daqing in industry. So Dazhai is a model village and Daqing is an exemplary oil city. Both were celebrated as a kind of role models of socialist development. The making of model villages and heroic individuals exemplifies a kind of a logic of socialist state-society relations. Their state developmental and also redistributive goals intertwined as Chinese Communist Party's powerful propaganda machine kind of penetrated deeply into the fabric of Chinese society. Social model making still resonates culturally in post-Mao society today and persists as a kind of technique of party-state governance. Alibaba, for example, actually appropriated and re-energized this kind of social model-making practices to advance its rural platformization campaign by invoking the central state's policy of promoting rural digital entrepreneurship and courting local subventional governments with imperative to boost rural economies. So as I documented both in my book and my 2020 paper, Alibaba's rural campaign was waged on both discursive and technical fronts. Discursively, Ali Research, which is directly serving the interests of Alibaba Group as an e-commerce research institute. It was kind of instrumental in weaving together a web of government agencies, state-owned research institutes, and universities, media, and peasant entrepreneurs together to co-create the so-called Taobao village phenomenon, right? So really turning into cases into a phenomenon. So initially coined by Ali Research in 2010, the concept of Taobao village itself reflected Ali Group's strategic rural expansion due to a rapidly saturating market at the urban market at that time. So the table at the bottom, taken from the same paper, maps the key events orchestrated by Ali Research to obtain state endorsement of its rural campaign and the impact of public relations efforts on state policies. So between 2010 and 2015, Alibaba's lobbying actually materialized in proposals by various parliamentary representatives calling on Chinese state to spearhead rural e-commerce at annual parliamentary sessions. And this actually led to the state to issue a series of documents to encourage rural e-commerce. Usually it comes with a lot of subsidies, policy preferential treatment and stuff like that. And on the technical front, Alibaba actually cultivated Taobao villages and peasant entrepreneurs through identification strategies and also media management. I learned in my field work with, Alibaba employees, former employees, and also Taobao entrepreneurs that Alibaba's data team actually generated visualizations of e-commerce business on this platform by tracking shop owners' IP addresses. And once they identify heavy business concentration in a rural area, they would dispatch Alibaba employees from the Ali Research Center to cultivate relations with local municipal, township, and village governments and peasant shop owners. And to bring visibility to the village, the company would actually invite journalists from various media outlets, including foreign journalists, to report on village and peasant entrepreneurs. Usually, these methods, as you can imagine, met with enthusiasm from local cadres because they promoted tangible political achievements, 政绩, and to attract more peasant e-commerce entrepreneurs, Alibaba often, chose peasant entrepreneurs inside selected Taobao villages to be a kind of a success story, and more advertising traffic was actually channeled to the selected peasant e-commerce shops by bumping up their product listing rankings, which is, important, and by offering them more opportunities to participate in online promotional activities, and media publicity actually supplemented the kind of algorithmic cherry picking to spread entrepreneur success stories for others to emulate, right? So the company's kind of integration with and appropriation of social mass mobilization campaign tactics to energize digital entrepreneurialism also informed the branding strategy of many of the rural e-commerce, model e-commerce entrepreneurs that I met in the villages. They had strategically crafted their brands and also self-brands in accordance with not just the commercial logic, but also the kind of political demands of corporate state nexus. Few more successful in Xiao and Lin. Their e-commerce brand Munuan was inextricable from Xiao's own self-branding as a socially responsible young entrepreneur, returned from the city to help his home village modernize and also digitalize the traditional village handicraft industry. So a little bit of backstory there. So Xiao's rise to fame started in May 2013 when a journalist from Shandong provincial TV station's agriculture channel came to W to report on the development of village e-commerce in the area. And not long after Xiao and Lin's first media profile, Ali Research named W as one of China's first batch of Taobao villages, and boosted by the village commercial and political success, Xiao's career as a model e-commerce entrepreneur soon took off. His public image got an important endorsement when the governor of Shandong province, the former governor of Shandong province, actually visited the couple's workshop while on the political tour of the village, which is a big deal for if you live in a small village in China. And in 2014, Xiao was actually selected as one of the 8 individuals, invited by Alibaba to ring the bell at the company's New York Stock Exchange IPO. But his visa was denied by the U.S. embassy, so he couldn't come. And so they found a replacement of him, also a peasant entrepreneur from a different region. Yeah. So the couple's About Us page on their e-commerce shop give us an idea of how their branding efforts are linked to China's broader political and economic context. Any shopper who opens the page will immediately see their brand's logo. So the company's name juxtaposed with a close-up shot of a pair of warm female hands waving a futon. And the company's business goals, according to the page, are to quote unquote rejuvenate rural handicraft industry, help absorb rural surplus labor, and promote rural economic development. The kind of glossy stories serve as a backdrop to the public recognition generated by Xiao and Lin's entrepreneurial efforts to digitalize this age-old village industry. And in the middle of the page, shoppers are presented with 3 sets of photos and narratives of the couple's achievements, including hosting government officials, being interviewed by journalists from media outlets like China Central Television and Russian State TV, and attending national political and commercial events. And taking together, the page tells a kind of coherent story about both Munuan, the brand, and the peasant entrepreneur couple who started it. The authenticity of their story instills a kind of trust and respect in consumers searching for reliable sellers in a very depersonalized virtual shopping mall. And by purchasing handicraft products from Munuan, urban middle-class shoppers can derive a kind of virtual satisfaction from supporting rural rejuvenation and also our peasant brothers and sisters. And for Alibaba, Munuan's brand story, like many other similar narratives of grassroots entrepreneurs found on the company's platforms, bolsters its corporate image as a champion of grassroots empowerment. In turn, this kind of corporate brand image aligns with the Chinese state's latest nation-building efforts to promote rural economic and social restructuring through the kind of micro-entrepreneurship. So Munuan's brand image, like the personal brands and Xiao and Ling, was actually built around the kind of collective politics of corporate and also state-backed digitalization. But the couple must carefully navigate the tensions between their individual achievements and their public role as the face of a collective movement. So as you'll see, the IT-driven entrepreneurialization of rural China kind of privileges the individualized e-commerce entrepreneur as its ideal subject and valorizes also intellectual digital labor by disguising it as IT entrepreneurship. And these tendencies are not only out of step with the reality of the collective organization of labor within the Chinese villages and also on e-commerce platforms. But they also, they also occlude the kind of indispensable role of manual labor in the production process. So the production platformization of family-based handicraft production and sales promise to kind of quote unquote upgrade the industry beyond the export-oriented Shanzhai model, which was characterized by fierce competition among small manufacturers to produce low-cost counterfeits or imitations of branded products. And in e-commerce villages, the reality was actually more complicated. So instead of competing to manufacture brandless, high-quality products at low cost for foreign retailers like Walmart or IKEA, e-commerce entrepreneurs indeed move up the value chain to design, produce, and sell directly to consumers. But the search ranking of online sales and profit maximizing algorithm e-commerce platforms like Taobao also actually discouraged rural entrepreneurs from investing labor and time in designing and testing new products and improving quality of existing products. So as you can see here, the picture on the right-hand side compares the branded and non-branded sellers of basically the same products produced in W Village. And the former could actually sold at a higher price that doubles the seller, right? So it's all in the branding and packaging and photography that matters. How Taobao's algorithm encourages Shanzhai can be seen in how a Baoquan or a best-selling product is created on Taobao. So a Baoquan is born when the product and its many Shanzhai variations becomes almost ubiquitous among consumers across the country and is sold numerous online or sometimes offline by vendors. Because Baoquan drives up search traffic and online sales volume, Alibaba, especially in its early days, when they try to expand its market, implicitly encourages the creation of Baoquan products by turning a blind eye to copying by e-sellers listed on the platforms. And Taobao's complicated and often adjusting search ranking algorithm and the kind of availability of profit maximizing paid marketing plugins like Zhitongche discourage product innovation. So Zhitongche is a paid search ranking system that charges shop owners a per click fee to help improve their product listing rankings on Taobao. Villagers told me that investing money and time in designing and prototyping new products usually does not commensurately reward innovators. It is actually more cost efficient to copy or appropriate existing products, especially Baoquan designs, and redirect the capital saved into Taobao's paid marketing tools and to bump up the product's search result ranking. Even when they had new designs, villagers were actually reluctant to invest capital and resources into research and development for fear that imitators would just steal their idea and make more profits. So prevalent design copying and appropriation in rural e-commerce reflect broader tensions in platformized social production where distinctions between creativity and copying, between individualistic profiteering and community-based collaboration become really modeled. And the village-based family production network actually intensified these tensions. Although relationship between e-commerce sellers and weavers were sometimes mediated by products collectors, any e-commerce entrepreneur can choose to source a particular product from any weaver. And this collective open production structure made it easier to steal or copy others' new designs. And absent the kind of legal binding contractual relationship typical of a formal business enterprise, village production networks overlap with the informal lineage of an agricultural society. So Pei, a rural entrepreneur, explained to me, I quote here, I can't keep my design away from my cousin, and he has to tell his wife about it. Then his wife's sister knows it too. And in no time, you'll see my design listed on every village shop's front page. So among sellers, platform-based market production works to keep products unit prices low. Although e-commerce platforms like Alibaba benefit by pitting sellers against each other to offer quality products at lower prices, cutthroat competition has definitely devalued handicraft labor. So almost all the women weavers I met during my field work were 40 and older. And as I keep returning to the village, their average age got older and older. And as I discussed in another recently published article, that most of the younger women I talked to showed contempt for weaving, dismissing it as either physically demanding and or culturally inferior or both to digital labor and urban service work, right? So they'd rather be a shop assistant in the supermarket or a Taobao entrepreneur in that regard. And these pictures actually show women weavers at work. As you could see, weaving is a monotonous and physically arduous. As sitting on the stool, the women repeat the same hand motions again and again, most specialize in a few standardized products. And with industry's growing demand for products and decreasing number of weavers, professional women weavers had to work constantly under time constraints. Sometimes when I hang out with them a lot, sometimes I feel like they look like human looms. And the kind of romanticized image of rural weavers often by rural branding stories, those online branding stories. And handicraft making was surprisingly also poorly paid. At a piece rate, a skilled female weaver had to work from dawn to dusk 7 days a week to earn as much as an average full-time e-commerce customer service girl or supermarket cashier could earn, which was about $600 per month when I was doing my fieldwork. And the shortage of women weavers already threatens the long-term sustainability of the e-commerce industry. And villagers I spoke with hope that higher earnings, it's gradually increasing, would eventually encourage younger women to take up weaving again. So I actually have a video, like a short video here, taken by my informants, of how women weaver at work, and she is actually weaving a storage bin there, and that's all the storage bins she made herself.
Very nice.
Yeah, so he's trying to speak some English. He will return later on in our presentation. Very interesting guy. And they usually started doing this when they were still teenagers, and and a lot of them are actually illiterate, so they couldn't really do e-commerce business because they couldn't read. Yeah, very, very cute auntie. So I'll stop here. But I hope this story of W Village and rural entrepreneur reinvention has illustrated my approach to digital platforms and algorithm. So instead of treating platformization as a standardized process, a universal process with algorithm operating in a kind of social vacuum, I situate them in the existing power relations and system meaning to articulate between the kind of virtual space of platforms and the physical space of community-based production and state society co-evolution there as well. So in doing so, I emphasize the historical continuities and also ruptures of platformized labor practices in China within the existing global subcontracting systems, and also the family-based gender division labor. And I supplement, in doing so, I supplement important works on state surveillance in China to show that how data and algorithm is also connected to corporate PR, to entrepreneurial self-branding, and to state developmental and sometimes redistributive initiatives as well. And rural digital entrepreneurship and platform and family production has indeed provided desirable business and self-employment opportunities to peasants and disadvantaged urbanites, especially prior to mid-2000s. The transformation of W Village highlights the network of state, commercial, and grassroots agents that co-constructed the Taobao Village phenomenon. My respondents actually outlined the various appeals of rural e-commerce to peasants, e-commerce platforms, and officials up and down the state apparatus. However, the emergence of digital platforms as new agents of state and the rural digital entrepreneur as a new kind of subjectivity are also beset by the contradictions inherent in this hybrid regime of labor, which spur the development of a new regime of value and rural differentiation, and this time actually centered on entrepreneurialism. So even as rural e-commerce production was hyped as a kind of glittering solution to China's restructuring and rural development needs after 2008, the kind of orchestrated techno-entrepreneur optimism for Taobao Village phenomenon also masks an emerging commercial political nexus between platforms and local officials and obscure the kind of contradictions resulting from the specific ways in which rural China and peasants were being integrated into the global digital economy. So instead of a magical solution to structural contradictions in the Chinese countryside, the digital reinvention of existing system production and value system has intensified tensions imminent in digital capitalism, and also in the new entrepreneurial labor regime between the individual and the collective, innovation and reproduction, and between manual and mental labor. And this is particularly true in rural China, where the recent kind of disruption of China's strong collective tradition has been strongly felt, where distinction between creativity and copying are more contested, and where the manual and mental labor actually coexist in close proximity. So the digital economy has minted new winners, but it also brought together new and pre-existing system of differentiation and inequality. So W Village's varied experiences in the new economy kind of reminded us of the culturally and spatially specific ways that labor regime transformation affect differently positioned subjects. So in following China's own historical trajectory, the story of e-commerce village W, like the other two stories I told in the book, I hope could be read as a supplement, if not a kind of modest counterbalance to proliferating accounts of China in Western English-speaking world produced since the late 2010s that examine China from Western perspectives. As I had shown in the story W and throughout the book, China did change significantly after it had rejoined the capitalist world system in the 70s under American influence. And in many aspects, such as advancing financialization, platformization, and promoting idea entrepreneurship, China had closely followed American footsteps. However, in the spirit of entrepreneurial reinvention, China also had pursued a distinct trajectory that builds on its own traditions and is also conditioned by its geographical limitations and changing positions in the global capitalist world order. And China's post-2008 reinvention, though might have the effect of destabilizing American global hegemony, has been mainly propelled by a desire, if not an anxiety, to overcome its own structural limitations and contradictions resulted from decades of integration into the global capitalist division of labor. And the problems faced by China and its current conjuncture is not alone. Decades of financialized global capitalism has wreaked havoc on national economies around the world. And this is the context in which entrepreneurialism actually prevailed amid weak labor protection, high inequality, and also debt finance economic bubbles. And China's post-2008 entrepreneurial reinvention, though building on its own imperial revolutionary and social traditions and continuing from its distinct developmental trajectory in the previous decades, is a specific manifestation of a global shift where national economies, to overcome global risk and economic instabilities are becoming, to borrow a concept from Carl Polanyi, kind of re-embedded into state and family institutions in a way. So by 2021, over a decade after my cousin's personal reinvention from a factory labor into a digital entrepreneur, the number of gig workers of all types in China actually exploded. As the gig workforce expanded, the side of labor struggles also shifted from industrial factories to include workers at digital platforms. And since then, the state actually launched a re-regulation campaign. A lot of you probably know, the tech crackdown, right? Targeting big tech platforms like Alibaba, with measures ranging from antitrust, company restructuring, reducing financial risk, to reissuing guidelines, protecting the rights of platform gig workers, which paralleled expansion of campaigns like rural rejuvenation and green GDP. And coincidentally, similar antitrust and labor protection measures are being proposed and implemented around the world, from EU's Digital Service Act to American Labor Department's proposal to classify more gig workers as employees and not independent contractors, and other acts like Build Back Better and Inflation Reduction Acts. So these and other national policies around the world have prompted predictions about the end of era of small government and unlimited globalization. And at a time of heightened global geopolitical tensions and also rising domestic contents towards, among many other things, inflation in the US and unemployment, especially youth unemployment in China, how to strike a balance between restoring domestic equity and maintaining decent economic growth, and the need to defend national security, I think it's a challenge that both countries and many other countries face at the moment. So just this summer, as I made it back to China for fieldwork research after almost 4 years pandemic-induced isolation, I learned how the state re-regulation campaign targeting big techs, coupled with a kind of prolonged zero COVID control, had exerted definitely a mixed impact on e-commerce and its practitioners around the country. But the industry itself, especially rural e-commerce, like entrepreneurial labor, continue to play a crucial role amid a general economic downturn and high youth unemployment in China, as the country attempts to kind of reinvent itself again post-pandemic. So these post-pandemic new developments actually prompt me to sort of continue to deepening and refining my thinking on the China tech sector with new research. I think looking forward, the question that will likely to haunt us in the years to come is whether the US and China, the two of the world's biggest economies, can find a way to coexist peacefully in their respective and converging paths of reinvention. So before I stop, I would like to, play this video, a very short one of, also sent by the informant you just saw of, his small workshop, because I want to, give, more weight to what my informant told me. So he's trying to speak, try his best to speak some English there. So that's his customer service guy, which is also a villager that he hired in the village. And he's actually one of the urban rural reverse migrants. Okay, so sorry about the time.
Oh, that's great.
Okay.
That's great. It's good.
Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you so much. So I know I have lots of questions, but I will, let's turn it over to both the folks here and on Zoom to see if they have any questions.
Was there ever an upturn of people who failed to get their business off the ground for e-commerce?
You mean like an upturn,
So
meaning?
like an increase of failures, because I know
Yeah.
It can't have been everybody who got a successful e-commerce.
Right. Definitely. As I mentioned, the first few years after 2008 was like a gold rush, right? Because the competition was not as fierce. And then more people went into the business, partially because of the sort of the policy shift that directed a lot of people into this kind of industry, because China wants to, transform itself, upgrade itself from traditional industry. You probably hear about Internet Plus and all these initiatives showing up in Chinese policy papers, and which translated into kind of substantial support and orchestrated also among all the different agents, including private companies like Alibaba, to really kind of propel the inflow into the industry, which sort of oversaturated the market, as I explained. And since then, it got, you know, more challenging for entrepreneurs to get involved or to succeed. And by the time 2015 and 16, when I was doing field work there, a lot of my interviewees was actually reluctant to talk to me because they said, you know, they saw me as a journalist, and they said media publicity, you know, would you only bring more people. We don't want more people in the industry. Yeah, so definitely there is a time, you know, when, you know, this kind of business becomes less profitable. I would say mostly in the area that I examined, which is on the east coast of China. But Alibaba or other like Pinduoduo, which is a sister company or parent company of Temu, kept expanding into the West China and now overseas, right? So so keep looking for new market and new, you know, participant in the economy, I would say. So it keeps growing. It didn't stop growing. Yeah.
Other questions? Well, one of them.
W Village.
Mm.
Can you give us a sense of how many people are working in commerce? And
Yeah.
are still working in agriculture?
Yeah.
Is that-
Yeah. So W Village, the area of it's the Yellow River Delta region, so it's mostly marshland. So traditionally, it has been hard for them to do farming, and they actually told me stories of during the social year, the state would force them to do wheat planting, and it was not very profitable for them. So they were like, for a long time, they stayed a poor village. And after reform and opening up, this so-called side business or sunshine, right? So really help them grow richer. And by the time e-commerce was there, so for Alibaba, their standard of designating a Taobao village, 70% of the villagers has to be involved in. Yes. So they have an official standard in that. How they measure it, I don't know. Right, but they have like a standard to nominate a Taobao village, and then and what I learned over the years is the peak probably was 2015 and 16 when I was in the village. I would say, you know, definitely more than 70% of villagers were involved, not just that one village, but the other cluster of villages involved in the different stages of supply chain. Some are, you know, some are in the delivery business, some are carpenters, right? So including some model for wooden model for the small furniture, especially if we're talking about small furnitures, right? So or, you know, delivering food for them sometimes. So it's definitely a kind of a business centered on e-commerce. But over the years, the wheat. Oh, so right. So for wheat production, that I didn't really kind of have the statistics, but I know there are still people who are engaging in that business. Increasingly, it has been outsourced to small companies, professionalized farmers, right? Instead of like a household, but there are still older, like grandparents who still keep a plot and, you know, to produce their own food, and sometimes with plots of, you know, vegetables and, you know, fruit trees, and, you know, for
renting the agricultural land to companies.
Yeah. So that's a trend, I think. Yeah.
So I see two hands, one here and one here and then one here. So why don't we take all of those questions stacked, and then Professor Zhang can respond as needed.
Sure.
So how do you think that the reinvention of this industry will impact the culture and the sense of community in these villages, in either a positive or a negative way?
My question is kind of like what is because you mentioned about the Temu and modifying business. Graduate school is also about a Temu and a Pinduoduo. Actually, the Pinduoduo is kind of like learning some like experience from the Taobao.
Yeah.
But what is kind of like the big difference between the Pinduoduo,
Uh-huh.
also the Taobao, and what is kind of like a Tmuz will face about challenges because the Tmuz want to copy kind of like recreated a Pinduoduo phenomenon in the United States, and that's what is I think is very interesting.
Yeah.
And I want to dig more into about the
Temu.
Tmuz app. And do you think there can be success or what kind of like a challenges will be
For Temu.
for Tmuz?
Okay.
And Caitlin.
I just want to say first, I thought that like you're setting up like algorithmic promotion of the sellers as like a tool of nation building was like super fascinating.
Thank you.
And just like really interesting to play with. But I was really curious when you were talking about Xiao and Meng and their story and how much like then personal branding and like maintaining what is like a clean, like kind of I guess PR image plays a role in like then them having any kind of success and so forth that like changed even like personal policing of their own relationships as they continue forward.
Like their gendered relationship as a couple. Good question. I actually talk about it in the book. I can introduce.
So feel free to take all or any parts of the question.
Right. So I'll answer your question first, which is a great question. I think so for sure, because for many years, because of the rural to urban migration, a lot of Chinese peasants actually left the countryside to become migrant workers. So it became a kind of vacuum in in the village, only elderlies and small kids were left. So this trend definitely bring a lot of younger people back, right? So which gives us a basis to reconstruct the village in a way. But what I learned from my conversation with them is also the different type of village that they turn to. And now because the whole village are kind of engaged in the business, their relationship become really mediated by platform-based commercial relationships. So I see a lot of really kind of tense competition among villagers, even among relatives. I think that really complicated the sort of like a organic village-based, like through cultural ties, through blood ties, and you have outsiders coming in, right? So but they also facilitated the kind of urbanization of some of the villages, especially W, for example, close to county seat. Now it's even further integrated actually into the county seat. And a lot of the villagers I met, once they accumulated enough money, they would purchase apartment in the county seat. And some of them would actually send their kids to county schools and spend lots of time in the county instead of in the village. And village became more of for their parents, right? Or like doing business and store their stuff and things like that, right? So the urbanization still, I think, is ongoing, but it's kind of complicated by this kind of business there. And your question about Temu, what is the first question again?
Actually, it's kind of like the Tmu's wait.
You had a first question, but I remember I will answer the Temu one.
Do you think the Pinduoduo phenomenon?
Oh, right.
Success in this kind of
Yeah.
I forgot. E-commerce actually, this is the e-commerce is kind of like social commerce for now because the people is adapting this kind of like social to the commerce, which you can invite more users and then you will get a cashback. So 砍一刀 that kind of thing happen in the United States. Succeeds sometimes in Alibaba as approaching to them.
So the issue of Temu is very complicated. It involves, a lot of factors. It definitely would be hard for them to replicate anything because definitely there's transnational logistics. For example, there's geopolitics come into play in the Temu factor. So talking about Pinduoduo, what happened in the village I visited was for a long time, Taobao and Jingdong for a while has been quite dominating in the scene. And then around 2007, 16 and 17, Pinduoduo came in. Right. And then at that time, what Taobao tries to do is actually to please the platform a little bit more and to improve the quality and to crack down on some of the counterfeits. And then when Temu came in, a lot of the small sellers actually went on to Temu. So Temu become a kind of lower end version of Taobao at that time, right? So that has been Temu's strategy. And so based on my conversation with and also people, sellers based at other places over the summer, sellers are kind of reluctant to sell on Temu because Temu, for them, it definitely opened up a lot of new opportunities, but most of them are not really making any profits on Temu either. And as you can tell, why things are so cheap, they are there to seek alternative because e-commerce in China has been so saturated. And then Pinduoduo opened up this new opportunity to them. So they're there mostly to give it a try. And I think it's still a long way to go for a team to figure out whether they can really deal with different consumer habits here in the US, but also the complicated geopolitical factors that are still under discussion, and also how to manage some supply chain, keep people interested in producing for them, right? So that would be a challenge. It would definitely be a different type of venture for them. Yeah. Your question, very interesting. So what I witnessed, most of the model entrepreneurs, I think I had a picture there, I don't remember, but the model entrepreneurs standing on the stage recognized are usually guys, men in their 20s or early 30s. When I stayed in the village for 6 months and I, go to their workshop on a daily basis, I teach their kids English. So I really get to understand their kind of dynamics of the family, and then notice that definitely the woman, the wife, takes up the majority of even like the e-commerce the managing with a lot of the business, doing customer service. And because because he became so successful, and his job is mainly to attend to, a relationship with Alibaba. So he actually got invited to participate in workshops organized by Alibaba very frequently, and also with local cadres as well. So he was also recognized on the local, like provincial and county level as a model entrepreneur. So he became more like a brand of the family, whereas his parents and his wife are kind of mainly doing a lot of the hard labor. So which raises an interesting question, which I also want to explore in my future research, is what does it mean for like a gender dynamics, right? Now that they're coming back to the family, is it a kind of a re-traditionalization there, right? So how is this dynamic different from definitely when they left to, go to the cities to work, for women, a lot of women, it could also be a kind of empowerment, but it's definitely exploitation. And now they return to the countryside, they have more, in a way, more control over their schedule, can tend to reproductive labor and, productive labor at the same time. And what does it mean for the family as a whole, right? The kind of politics of family and gender there, which is interesting, raises a lot of interesting questions. And I have more stories about the kind of family dynamics and gender dynamics in the book as well. Yeah, thanks for the question.